This, for example, is a knife, and it's just a stone chip where they've taken the sharp edge that's produced on the stone chip and then deliberately blended the opposite edge. So you can hold it like this. And I'll show you something here, if you can help me with this, actually. If you just hold it really tight, a little bit close to the edge, and yeah, so as you can see, these things are really seriously sharp. Actually, this one I definitely dealt with. People would accidentally cut themselves.
Would they have sharpened it that way, or they found it that way?
Well, you produce it, and I'll show you how. This is sort of the starting point, is a chip. You feel the edge. I haven't messed with these edges. You get an idea how sharp those edges are. You can get the sharpest edge in nature in stone, a 1 molecule thick edge.
No kidding.
Yeah. So that's why I have the don't touch. So how did they make that? Well, they start off with a piece of flint, and flint. The only kinds of stone that will work this way are chemically similar to glass. There's silicon dioxide. This is actually identical to glass, except it's got impurities, so it's not translucent. So you strike it, a flat surface near the edge, and it sets up a shock wave. And the piece fails or breaks on the margin of the shock wave. And because it breaks in a predictable manner, people could set up cores, which is what the piece you're striking, to produce flakes where you could predict the shape of the flake. Neanderthals were really good at this. It was one of their favorite ways of doing it. And I've got a replica I did of this, where they prepared a core by removing a whole series of flakes, creating a shallow dome, shallow regular dome. The rest of the piece they don't really have to mess with, except to prepare a platform on the edge, a flat area they're going to strike, and the angle between this and this has to be exactly 70 degrees. There's almost no margin for error. And then they strike it, and off comes the piece. And when I took this one, the edge broke, so I wasn't happy with it. So you can see how I trimmed it back. You see how that overlaps here? The second platform had to be trimmed back.
What are you showing?
What?
What are you showing?
This is the techniques Neanderthals used to make stone tools.
Like knives.
Yeah. And so they set the core up like this, whack. If you hit it right, and there's almost no margin for error, you got to hit it at the right angle, the right force, the right place, you'll get a chip off that mirrors the shape of the core. So if you want a sort of a generic round piece, you make a round core. If you want an elongated piece, you make an elongated core.
How do you make cores?
By this process of repeatedly striking this stone. As I say,
that's called a core?
a piece from which stuff has been removed is called a core. The piece that comes off is called a flake.
Oh, okay.
And the flake has sharp edges, and you can modify flakes into things like spear points by, I could actually turn this into a spear point. You hold it up like that, you hit the flat surface because it's more efficient in transferring the force of the hammer than hitting a curving surface. And just very carefully with a small hammerstone strike off a series of small flakes. You feel the edge there, you can feel the scars down there from each one of those. That's actually a fairly good sharp edge, but the unmodified flake edge is actually potentially the sharpest edge in nature. Some of those things you can get a 1 molecule thick edge.
What?
Yes, exactly.
That's
which is
crazy.
why I have the be careful with the sharp edge. You can touch these, but you just have to be careful. These are all
with that,
indeed.
You wouldn't know. It looks like Neanderthal.
Yeah, this one you can see how, because you can see the light through it, this would be a really thin edge there.
And we know that the steps they use to make these because we actually find the waste products. This is an expended core from the production of one of these round flakes, and there's the scar from the flake removal there, there's the scar from the flake removal there. And we even have intermediate stages in that. Here's the dome on the core. There's the preparation of the platform they were going to hit. But I think, my suspicion is, that they didn't like that angle. It's too acute. It should be closer to 70 degrees, so they threw the core away without striking. But this is technically one hit away. You hold it like that, whack, and you should get a flake off like so. And what they're ultimately producing, and these are some real ones, they're about 140,000 years old, they're the circular thin flakes with the, if you look carefully at the ends there, the bow-shaped end, which is very characteristic of this technique. And here are 3 spear points.
Will those be sharp?
These are really sharp.
Because they were good at it.
They were really good at it, and doing these triangular ones in particular is exceedingly difficult. You can make no mistakes setting up the core. Everything has to be right. The blow has to be right. You've got literally about a millimeter margin of error in where you strike
How do
it.
they do it without any...
Because they're a lot more coordinated than we think they are. The conventional view of Neanderthals is they're big, dumb, you know,
they weren't stupid.
uncoordinated.
They were smart.
They certainly had an exceptional geometric sense, because to set the core up, you have to be thinking about how you're going to modify the volume of rock, and it's not easy. It's taken me 30 years to learn how to do this. I know a lot of good flint workers who actually can't do that at all.
Do they have like specialized people in the community who would make them? Or would
The chances are they didn't. Neanderthal groups are very small groups. They probably no more than 15, 20 individuals. And everybody, like most hunting-gathering societies, everybody has to be able to do everything because you're largely self-sufficient. And we do find some sloppy examples of stuff that, in fact, Art's manuscript, I was just reading a manuscript by an old professor of hers, who was talking about some of the poorly executed specimens that he found in the site, probably being good examples of children practicing, of kids just putzing around. It does take time to do this properly. And they're a lot better at it than I am. I mean, in part because they're a lot stronger. I mean, I have greater hand speed. And a lot of it is hand speed and motor control. And I sit behind a desk, you know, stand up in front of a classroom all day and look at these arms. It's pathetic compared to a Neanderthal. And so they're a lot more adept than people conventionally think they are.
You can show that femur and explain the quadriceps.
The other thing is Neanderthals are extremely powerful. This is a very nice cast of, actually the complete specimen reconstruction is over by the display case, is the same thing. And if you look at the femur, you'll see that it's got this bend to it. Modern human femur is straighter, the shaft is straighter. And for a long time people thought the bend was the result of a disease called rickets, a vitamin deficiency. But we in fact now know that that's the natural state of these things. And the curvature is to accommodate a truly powerful bicep muscle. Like Neanderthals and earlier hominids are all really hypermuscular compared to modern humans. And one of the ways we can tell that, they're not bigger, they're just stronger. In fact, the average height of a Neanderthal is only about that. They're not that tall. But if you wanted to see what a Neanderthal's physique looked like, look at Olympic heavyweight class weightlifters, the guys that look fat, but they're just really stocky and immensely muscular. That's sort of the body model to look at for Neanderthals. And you see this line right here is where the bicep muscle actually attaches to the bone. And that line's double the width of the same line on a modern human. If you did an X-ray of a Neanderthal bone, you'd find bone densities that are more than twice the density of healthy modern human bone. And that's a result of more muscular stress on the bone. Bone grows or increases or decreases its density depending on muscular stress. This is why elderly people have problems with osteoporosis. There's no stress on the bone being put on their bones. The bones essentially desolidify and they get very brittle. These guys had bone density levels that equaled or exceeded the bone densities measured on the most highly trained, steroid-pumped-up professional athletes today. And I'm talking about the football players, the weightlifters, the Olympic shot putters, stuff like that. Immensely powerful. And another good example of this in terms of the stress put on bones is the size of the joint surfaces. This leg bone is about the same length as mine, but look at the width of that joint at the knee. And if you had an X-ray, you'd see that the head of the femur would be about double mine. And that's, again, mostly the result of a lot of locomotor stress on these things. The other